Уважаемая аудитория, уважаемые слушатели, сегодня мы начинаем лекцию нашего эксперта, который приехал с Британским советом, Тома Флеминга. Том – эксперт в области креативных индустрий, возглавляет Конституционный центр креативной индустрии, разрабатывает различные стратегии культурной политики во многих городах, эксперт в области креативной экономики города. И вот 2 дня буквально мы работали с Британским советом над темой, как сделать Ульяновск творческим городом, и над разработкой такого творческого манифеста, вернее, многочисленных рекомендаций для развития творческих индустрий, творческого кластера Ульяновской области. Сейчас я представляю слово Тому, который нам расскажет, вернее, прочитает лекцию о креативных индустриях. Спасибо.
Спасибо. That's the last word you'll hear from me in Russian until I say spasibo at the end. Okay, right. How are you all? You okay? Yeah. Good. Enjoying yourselves in this packed program? Yeah. Good. All right. So the idea is that I talk for maybe 45 minutes or so, and then hopefully we can have a chance to have a little bit of a discussion, because you've done a lot of listening today, and maybe that's getting a little bit tiring. Okay, so you all right, translators? Is that okay? Is the speed? Yeah? Okay, good. So I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about what I see as the key development factors for establishing a sustainable creative city. Okay? Let me get this working. As you heard in the introduction, I run a consultancy and research company. We're based in London, in the UK, but we work not all over the world, but in lots of places in the world. I just come back from here from Vietnam, and I'm off next week to Slovakia, the week after that to Ukraine, the week after that to Nigeria, the week after that to Korea, the week after that to China. So we do lots of international work, and hopefully I can bring some of that international perspective to this forum, because I think it's important if we are to develop a cultural sector in Ульяновск, and if we're to develop a strong creative economy, then we need to know what's happening elsewhere, because it is a global industry, and the agenda around how to attract and retain talent is absolutely a global industry. I'm sure that Ульяновsк, like lots of other medium-sized cities, struggles to retain talent, struggles to attract talent, struggles to re-attract talent from other places, because other cities and regions perhaps are offering different kinds of attractiveness, features, perhaps they're more interesting to the talent, perhaps they offer better job opportunities. But I'm not one of these consultants who just talks about the commercial elements within culture, just talks about the creative industries. I see there as being a real interdependence between subsidised or relatively subsidised cultural sector and the more commercial creative industries. There is a continuum. There are multiple interdependencies, some of them monetised, some of them based on human transaction, some of them based on the structure and the organisation for investing and supporting in culture. So the kind of clients we work with, like UNESCO, the World Bank, the British Council, Arts Council, they are as much around personal and cultural development as they are about the economy of culture. So I want that to be clear as I talk to you today. And I think there are some quite distinctive factors, some distinctive challenges, but also some distinctive opportunities for, I guess, what you might call post-Soviet cities or Eastern Bloc cities. And we've been doing a lot of work over the years. It was 10 years ago that I was in this region, in Mitrograd, talking around how culture can be a tool for development and how the creative industries can potentially grow in this region. Subsequently, I've been working in places like Tolyatti and Samara and Novosibirsk and Arkhangelsk and Tula and Moscow and St. Petersburg, etc. So there's a sort of sense of what's happening in Russia and some of the specific challenges and opportunities that you have as in a post-Soviet, in a new climate, in a new paradigm. And I'll bring some of that learning to bear, I think, today as well. And also, although we're based in London, increasingly I think it's smaller cities that are setting the agendas. A lot of the early discussions around the creative industry were very metropolitan in their outlook. It was always examples of what's happening in London, and then later examples about what's happening in Moscow. That's great, but actually they're very different environments. They obviously share connections with the rest of the world, which are harder to nurture in places like Williams. They have economies of scale, they have deep and very mobile talent pools, and they have large institutions, they have large markets. For smaller cities, there are a set of other agendas which we need to be mindful of in somewhere like Williams. There are lots of other cities in Russia that aren't Moscow or St. Petersburg. And I think that means that we can perhaps develop a different paradigm for how to support culture and sustainable creative industry development in a smaller city climate. We've been doing a lot of work in smaller cities. This is a place called Guimarães in northern Portugal, which was European Capital of Culture last year. I was the director of the Creative Economy Programme as a part of the European Capital of Culture. And is this going automatically now? I'll give you some examples about what we did in Guimarães in terms of integrating an approach to cultural development with grassroots creative industries development. And we're just about to launch a new network for smaller creative cities in the autumn of this year, which will be a social networking tool really where different smaller cities across the world, from South America to East Asia, can connect and share ideas, develop case studies, talk about the distinctive challenges and opportunities they face in developing the creative industries in their particular environment. But what the core business really is around how we embed creativity as a resource for economic development in our cities. This is what we do most of our work in. How do we ensure that we don't just carry on with broken economic models, broken social models, yesterday's education models, yesterday's approaches to culture and investment? How do we actually put a dynamic, mixed, balanced economy through the creative sector, where cities major on their strengths, where every city can be niche, distinctive, and develop relevance that no other city can have? Because although the word creative is used in lots of places, its application requires different approaches in different places. It's critical that cities identify how they can be niche, distinctive, and hyper-relevant through an approach to supporting creative industries. Because lots of cities are trying to do that all over the world. There are many, many places that are exploring the potential they have in their talent, which is the major resource that they have. And they're looking for ways to support the creative industries as a tool of direct economic development and as an indirect tool of development. Cities are positioning themselves often quite aggressively in terms of their creative credentials. And in a sense, as I said this morning in the plenary, it's about making the most noise and making the most distinct noise, because cities are competing with one another to be noticed by mobile talent, by mobile resources. And it's critical, therefore, that creativity is used as a tool to maximum effect in that environment. It's not a choice. It's not a nice thing to have. It's absolutely a must-have if the city is going to be able to future-proof its business models. It's going to be able to support its talent to be relevant in a global community, in a global marketplace. There's a lot of talk broadly about creativity, being more creative, which is one thing. But there's also a lot of talk specifically on the creative industries. Businesses, organisations operating within a broad set of sectors that share one thing. They share something that they're mobilised by: creative thinking, creative production. The arts, fashion, film, design, music, crafts. They all share one thing: they're mobilised by creative thinking, creative practice. Some of them it's about content development, some of them it's about product development, some of them it's about service development. But they all broadly nurture creativity, and ultimately they have an economic value, either directly because they're businesses that trade, trade on their ideas, trade on their content, or they're businesses that provide symbolic value that other people, other parts of the economy benefit from. For example, the way that a strong visual arts sector can help to generate tourism, or a strong music sector can help to provide the kind of environment that's attractive to creative talent. Of course, this is part of an overall process of economic transformation that we're going through globally. The notion that we move, as an economy develops, it moves from a dependence on the very labour-intensive, low-paid sectors in agriculture, in heavy industry, through to a focus on information, on content, on ideas. And it's the countries and the cities in those countries that are able to trade on ideas, trade on creativity, are those that ultimately, because the evidence proves this, they're the ones that ultimately provide higher value jobs. They have the highest wages, they have the highest indicators of well-being, they have the highest indicators of inclusion and tolerance. There's a correlation, ultimately, that's underway. That's not to say that other sectors aren't also important. Of course, in Russia you have something called the energy sector, which lots of other countries would like to have as well. But it's important, I think, to have a balanced economy, an economy that is not dependent only on one or a few sectors, but is dependent on multiple types of multiple types of economic production. That builds in sustainability. It designs out dependence on certain sectors, and it opens up opportunities for more people to trade and exchange on a global level. So the real raw material for the creative industries, the creative economy, are people. It's a talent-intensive sector. Now, it sounds kind of crazy because any economy is dependent on people, but this is a sector that is absolutely critically dependent at its core on individuals thinking through problems, individuals expressing themselves, expressing their identity, individuals dreaming and imagining, and trying to perform that, trying to express that. Other sectors, talent of that kind isn't quite so central. And often, though, this sector is perhaps stereotyped as just being about young people, young talent, but actually it's about all of the people. It's particularly in societies which are ageing, where there's a growing ageing population, but also in societies where people are perhaps losing their employment in traditional industries and need to find ways of developing themselves as economic entities in other sectors. So the crisis, we've seen a real growth in startups, creative businesses, people who lost their jobs in sectors like financial services, like the manufacturing sector. Talent intensive is the key. And why, ultimately, is this becoming such an important agenda globally? And we've talked a lot today already about the value added and the moral landscape around supporting culture. Really important, obviously, that's what is the most important thing. Culture as a basic human right. Culture and expressiveness as a sense of something that we're entitled to as human beings, something that defines us in contrast to other creatures. But the reason, of course, why the creative industries is talked about as being so significant by governments and by the big bits of government which have the most money is because of the economy, because of what it provides to the overall economy. Now, there are different ways of understanding the economic value of the creative industries globally. Some work by UNESCO, and some work by the World Bank, and some work by UNCTAD broadly accepts that we're talking about 4 to 7% of the overall GDP globally, which it's not a lot, but it's also a hell of a lot if you think about it just as one sector. And if you also think about how it's disproportionately clustered in certain economies, particularly industrialised economies in Northern and Western Europe, increasingly in Southeast Asia and in North America. In the UK, where I'm from, we have a really strong evidence base about the profile and dynamics of the creative industries. And we know that there's over 2.5 million people employed in the creative industries. In a country of 60 million people, quite a lot of people working in those sectors which are about creativity, content development, service development. In one city alone, okay, a big city, in one city alone where I live, London, 800,000 people. So about the population of everybody in Louisiana in one sector. The critical thing, though, is that actually there are more people employed in creative jobs in other sectors. People who work in design or advertising within larger firms. So if we think about that and the creative talent that those businesses require for them to grow, this is a huge sector in its own right. And the sector tends to be clustered in cities and certain cities. So if you think about that stat about just now about there being about 4 to 7% of GDP, in certain cities we're getting upwards of 10%, 15%, sometimes 20, even 25%. So cities that have the greatest to gain from engaging in the creative industries. It's also cities that have the greatest to lose if they don't engage in developing the creative industries. And of course this is all made possible or all accelerated by certain enormous shifts in society, in the way that we live and work, in the way that we connect. So the whole agenda around digitalisation, this digital age, this incredibly disruptive force, we're just at the beginning of exploring the possibilities of what digital technology brings to us as a society. We're just at the beginning in terms of what it brings to us in terms of creative industries development. The hunger, the need for content from an increasing array of platforms and channels, which is made possible through digital technology, is only going to grow. You only need to look at the way that our lives have changed systemically since digital technology became pervasive. The amount of hours we spend online, the amount of hours we spend downloading things, the amount of hours we also spend streaming content from markets all over the world, watching films, listening to music. So the graph around consumption of digital content, creative content enabled by digital technology is only going upwards. And that, of course, means there are more possibilities for developing creative industries jobs in more places, particularly places that are connected, places that are able to mobilise talent. You know, would we have imagined this world just 15 years ago? I don't think so. So let's see what happens. But as I said just now, we're only at the very beginning of what's going on with digital technology. And this is back in 1987 when Robert Solow talked about the computer age. Then they thought they had already reached the summit of the possibility around the growth of creative and cultural products and services through computers. Now we realise that that wasn't prehistoric in terms of what the sector is going to bring. And I think that digital technology as well enables or motors new platforms, new possibilities for exchange, for convergence between different sectors. Couple that with growth, couple that with innovation in other sectors, for example in material science, couple that with innovation around IT more generally. You can see how creative industries converge with other sectors. So fashion and technology, fashion, material science. Just think about the range of materials that there are available today, and they weren't, of course, available yesterday. It all is linked in the supply chain to the creative industry. But there are also some negative drivers, some other reasons why you develop an approach toward creative industries. So we know that it provides jobs. We know that cities that are successful can turn around their economies, can grow high-value economies. Some cities have a great sense of urgency. They're responding to a set of negative factors, and they see the creative industries potentially as a means of addressing those negative factors. So this process of industrial change, de-industrialisation for some, re-industrialisation for others, has created problems, obviously, in terms of factors like unemployment, brownfield land, fragmented communities. And the creative industry is part of, by all means not the solution to this, could be part of a range of solutions, a range of tools to addressing those issues. Because the cities that deindustrialise fastest, and in Russia you have a lot of mono-cities that are dependent on one industry. That makes it very, very difficult once those industries are in decline or restructuring in terms of retaining talent, retaining almost the purpose of being there in the first place. So we need to think cleverly about if we're going to keep these cities afloat, if we're going to keep them alive, how do we make them relevant? How do we make them stickier so that talent stays there? Talent doesn't stay there because it's trapped, it's immobilised. Talent stays there because it wants to stay there. Because cities all over the world are facing this agenda. Cities are shrinking in many parts of the world, whereas in other parts of the world they're growing enormously because the urban population is dramatically growing overall. So the approach you would take in a city that has been losing talent, is struggling to stay relevant, would be different to a city, to the approach you would take in a city that has just got an abundance of talent arriving in it every day, such as like the cities in Southeast Asia. So the approach to supporting the development and growth of the creative industries, and the reason why you do it vary by place. But the compelling factor overall is that cities are to be meaningful. They have to be relevant in terms of being places you want to work in, you want to settle in, you want to build your lives in, you want to grow your families. And the agenda, a lot of the agenda now, particularly in places like Southern Europe, which has such high youth unemployment, is on how we can position the creative industries as something that is absorbent of the young talent that is in those societies. Countries like Spain and Portugal spent an enormous amount of money over the last 2 decades investing in infrastructure, which has been key in terms of their growth. But actually, it wasn't that they didn't invest sufficiently in their human resources, they didn't invest in their talent, they didn't invest in supporting their graduates to become entrepreneurs, for example. It's fine when the economy is doing okay, you can absorb that labour in the service sector and the construction industry. When it's not doing very well, you have huge systemic problems like the youth unemployment in Spain, Portugal, Greece, and other Southern Europe. So there are different agendas at play here in terms of why we would try to develop creative industries. I think in a city like Julianos, the central issue here is about how we can make the city overall, the economy, more productive. Productive for today, productive for tomorrow. In terms about being resilient, you need to design in a range of sectors so that you have resilience to shifts in the economic, shifts in the economy, in the global economy over the coming years. So we don't find ourselves in a situation where tomorrow, if the aerospace industry struggles, Julianos doesn't sink. Tomorrow, if the energy sector or the digital sector like itself contracts, Julianos doesn't struggle. It's about balancing and diversifying the economy overall. I think there's a conceptual shift here as well, which is important in Russia and in a lot of, I guess, post-Soviet economies, in terms of what is it that drives the economy. Yes, it is big businesses, large industrial plants, but it's also about very small businesses. The creative industries is a relatively small business sector, made up of many micro businesses. Put them all together, that's like a car plant, but they're not visible in the same way as a car plant. Therefore, often policymakers don't like to, or don't feel that they can engage them in the same way. Because policymakers, they like big levers, things they can pull that show an instant result. There's our power plant, there's our hydroelectric power station. It's much braver politicians that try to nurture the talent base to grow lots of small entities and to build the connections that collectively you have an industry. I think we're starting to see, somewhere like Julianos, we're starting to see an awareness of the power that small businesses can have in every sector and in the creative sector as well. And I would like to think that in Julianos at the moment, and in other cities, we're almost at the kind of start-up phase of a new kind of urban production economy. We've got emergent activities, some of them in old industrial buildings. Like this is an old industrial building here where I work in East London. There's an old brewery, beer factory. But in some ways, you can see how the recolonisation of some of these industrial spaces is symbolic of a change in economy. But it's also real. This is a new phase of economic development. And I think we would be foolhardy not to cherish it and not to nurture it. The one major critical thing I'd like to say, though, the main caveat really from all of this, is that we mustn't be overly evangelical about the role of creativity or more broadly about the role of cultural development, because it's very easy to talk about it. Which is why this morning in the plenary I perhaps was asking for a more practical approach as well as a visionary approach, because everybody in the world is starting to talk about how creative they are, how cultural they are. Every city is trying to express how trendy it's becoming, how cool it is. Even. Certainly every city is trying to talk about how creative it is. Now, if we think about this word, dolphins, yeah, that's a nice word, isn't it? Everyone sort of smiles when they think about dolphins. Pleasant. Yeah. It's lovely. Yeah. Dolphins. Yeah. Cheers you up to say dolphins. There's a danger that creativity is a little bit like that. Kind of political opiate. Something that sounds modern, sounds contemporary, sounds progressive. But it's only progressive if you do something with it. It's only progressive if you start developing actions related to that agenda. Otherwise it's rhetoric, it's glossy. Now I'm convinced in Julian's that there is this serious approach towards really doing things. We see that in places like Kvartal, the incubator. That's as a sapling, what we need to do is grow a forest, I think. I was asked to talk a little bit about the European context here as well. It is interesting at the moment what's happening in Europe post-crisis from a European Commission level, because there is, I think for the first time, a progressive unity of agendas where investment in culture and investment in cultural education is seen as absolutely linked to investment in creative business. There isn't this gap between those approaches. And this new programme, Creative Europe, and the wider investment landscape from the European Commission is bridging those different agendas. And I think that is really something we should be celebrating. And I hope that next year in Russia, with the Year of Culture, is something that Russia can also aspire to and deliver on. But there is a broadness as well to the approach to creativity. It's not just about developing creative industries jobs. It's also about developing a mindset. It's developing an approach to life, an approach to work that enables you not just to survive, but to flourish in an increasingly fast, increasingly global environment that we're in. We're running to stand still as individuals. There's a danger of being atomised, being disconnected, of increasingly young ages, people feeling that they're out of touch, can't keep up with what's happening with new technology, can't keep up with the latest trends, feel bombarded with things. If we start to invest in creative education at an early age, enabling our young people to work in teams, to collaborate, to problem solve, to enjoy the arts, but also to enjoy technology and the arts together, that's the way of starting to introduce the mindset, the skills that enable you to be flexible, to cope with the increasingly frenetic and challenging landscape that the world is throwing at us as we move on in time. So, that's my introduction. What I'd like to do now is just to raise some questions for Julian's before I start talking about what I think are some major opportunities for other cities. Just to kind of get you thinking while I'm talking about what all this means for Julian's. What is the opportunity landscape for Julian's? And I think there are some obvious things here. If I had 5 minutes with the governor, I would say, he would say to me, why would you develop the creative industries in Julian's? And I would say, high-value jobs. I would say, it's a way of embracing the full diversity of the talent base. It's a way of professionalising the cultural sector, ensuring the cultural sector is more productive, more innovative, more open. It's a way of embedding competitiveness across the economy, embedding innovation across the economy. It's about developing dynamic, tangible clusters of activity that help you to differentiate from other cities, but also help you to create energy and vitality within your city. It's about rebranding, but not branding in a top-down way. It's about branding in a participatory, bottom-up way. In the same way as Neil Peterson, who was here earlier on from Liverpool didn't create the Beatles brand. 50 years ago, however long it was ago. It was the creative production that developed that brand. It was about enabling creative people to flourish because of the branding. And it's about well-being. It's about feeling at ease with yourself, feeling at ease with your city, feeling that your city is generous, is warm, is inclusive, is flourishing. That's what I would say. So is Ульяновsk positioned to be a creative city overall? Is it prepared to be a creative city? And to get there, we need to think about what it is that is distinctly creative about Ульяnovsk, what makes this city specifically creative. But we also need to think about what this city wants to be in the future. We need to gaze to the future and think about what is possible. And we need to think about it not just for now, but think about how you establish the building blocks for the future. They're not just quick wins, but actually setting things in train that might not have an impact for a long time. That's the scary thing about this. Things like education, things like the incubation, investment in incubation, these are long-term processes. These are not quick wins, and that's challenging for all of us, because you can lose your nerve, you can lose faith in it. And I think we need to build absolutely from what we know. This is not about importing concepts, it's not about importing infrastructure, it's not even about importing talent. It's about building from the historic diversity of the city. But it's not just about protecting that history, it's about embedding and enlivening that history through creativity, through contemporary creative production and consumption. And we need to more effectively tell the story, tell that story of change, that process. Because a lot of cities are not very good at telling their stories, not very good at talking about their asset base to each other as well as outside. How many people talk to each other about what's happening in the world, what the strategic agendas are, what the city feels like, and then how many people talk about that outside of the city? Very, very quickly. Through the process that we've been going through over the last few days with the support of the British Council, there are some obvious kind of positive things in Ульяновsk. You know, there's a strong and deep tradition, strong identity. There is a rich and varied cultural sector, lots of cultural organisations, lots of cultural institutions. It's a city with a lot of knowledge in the education sector, in the science and technology sector, in the government. It is a city, it seems to be a city where there is a sense of community, there does seem to be some level of intimacy. It's not like a lot of cities which feel anonymous, disconnected. Some people have told me this, and I get a sense of that from the way that people are engaging through the workshops, the way that people have been so hospitable to us. There is a sense of leadership in the city, not just leadership from a government level, but leadership from the sector. People care, people have been participating in a way that shows that they care. So there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of passion. So the building blocks are there for a sustainable, creative economy, but there are some challenging things there. Some places almost have too much identity. It kind of hangs heavy on them, you know? And I think that Ульяновsk obviously has a lot of identity. Some would say it's got too much identity to link to certain things, which makes it very difficult to move into other areas, or to diversify, or to express different agendas. You can feel hamstrung by a strong identity. It's not necessarily a weakness, it's just a challenge. I get a sense that collaboration isn't as strong as it can be in this city. Within sectors, but also between sectors, between generations, between different communities. Collaboration is critical to establishing any kind of creative economy. I get a sense that there are some serious challenges in terms of how we professionalise the cultural sector, but also professionalise those small and emerging creative businesses that are there, lifting their entrepreneurship, developing their technical and management skills, helping them to nurture markets. And obviously there are issues linked to all these things around how we support the retention of talent here, so that we give people who live here a sense that they can continue to live here to fulfill their dreams. But actually I also think the re-attraction of talent is critical for a city like Ульяnovsk. Because as a smaller city, it will always lose talent. But the critical opportunity is for attracting that talent back. And attracting that talent back younger, when it's still economically active, when it's gone out there into the world and made connections, built a name for itself, bring some of that back to Ульяnovsk. That's the way to build a prosperous creative economy overall. Not to try to hold the talent back, let it go, but provide opportunity for it to come back and come back with responsibility to the city. And I think there is a major underlying issue here around confidence and connectivity, which is why this forum is so important. Connectivity with other parts of the world, getting a sense of what is possible, getting a sense of how other people did stuff, and then confidence to do it here. Because Ljubljana is a very pleasant place. It's a good size, it's in a good location, you've got 5 million people or something, 3.5 million people in 5 hours driving time or something like this, it's got the marketplace locally, it's got the potential for critical mass. It's just about the confidence to deliver. I think, bearing some of those things in mind, that there are 7-ish major opportunities for developing a strong creative economy in cities of this kind of size. I'm not going to say that these are opportunities specific to Ulyanovsk. These are things that other cities that I think are really strong in the creative economy are doing. And then it'll be up to you and your colleagues and your partners to think about what they need in the context of Ulyanovsk. Because I can't do that, having only been here for 2 days. But let's start with the basic thing. The thing that is the easiest thing to do, the most important thing to do, but for some reason in so many places, the thing that people can't quite get their heads around doing. Supporting talent at an early age. I mean, the biggest crime in any city is where there's a poverty of aspiration amongst the young people, where they feel that their options and opportunities are limited in the city in which they were born in which they live. If you get to a position where the consensus is that there is a lack of opportunity, then you really are in trouble as a city. So we need to correct that in Ulyanovsk, ensure that there is a consensus among the young people that Ulyanovsk is a city of opportunity. It doesn't mean that they feel that they have to stay. They might want to go, but it means that they might also feel they can come back. And when they come back, they're not compromising just because they love it and they're from there. They're coming back because they do feel that it's a place that can deliver opportunities. The kind of tools, I suppose, that you need to think about there involve creative education from a very young age, primary school age. Can we support our cultural sector to work with the schools to improve arts teaching in the classroom at an early age? Can we support, through our colleges, young people as they go into secondary level education to think about career paths in culture, in the creative industries? Can we develop projects like apprenticeships, like internships? Like, can we develop young business clubs for culture in our schools? How do we lift the aspiration of our young people? How do we nurture the sense that it's possible to work in the creative sector? That culture isn't just something that the parents did or your grandparents do. But culture is actually about expressing yourself and building your identity, and sometimes about building businesses through your identity. Are there technical skills that we can start embedding at a younger age? Technical skills, for example, in digital media, things like computer programming. There's a huge skills gap in the digital economy, the creative economy, for programmers, for people who can code. But there's a bigger skills gap for people who can code and collaborate with creative content producers. There's an enormous amount of opportunity for developing that sector in Ulyanovsk. We heard earlier from Gillian from Dundee. In that city, they managed to bring together coders and creative people working in graphics and in plastic art. Collectively, they developed a computer game sector of international reputation. There's no reason why that can't happen somewhere like Ulyanovsk. But more broadly, we need to open up the way that our education institutions engage with the creative talent base. We need to open up the way that knowledge is created in our institutions. And universities are central to that whole process. The typical university, the university of yesterday, and very recently yesterday, works very differently to the way the universities are working today, or if they're not, the way the universities should be working today. Universities used to be driven by departmental approaches to knowledge development. They wouldn't work between departments very often. Universities used to be focusing just on a very traditional set of core competencies, rather than a wider set of competencies. Universities didn't used to work very well with industry. Universities used to think that entrepreneurialism was something for tomorrow and that they needed to work with their students in terms of technical practice today. But now we're seeing these universities recognising that if they're going to survive, if they're going to be relevant for today and tomorrow's economy, they need to provide these interdisciplinary, interactive landscape for creativity to flourish, for knowledge to exchange, for people to be able to experiment, for people to be able to share, for people to be able to explore the potential for applying their knowledge for things like business before they leave the university. And also universities are starting to wake up to their civic responsibility. They're not just centres of learning, they're also critical in terms of the way that the city sees itself and understands itself. And if, as we saw when we went to one of the universities 2 days ago, if when we see the graduates say, well, we don't think we should stay in Ulyanovsk, then that, I think that actually suggests the university needs to do a lot more to work with the city so that they can work together to build an economy that is more attractive to those students, so they do want to stay or they do want to come back. It's a civic responsibility, otherwise the university is just providing talent to other cities, which is not really in the interests of Ulyanovsk, I would know. So how can we position our education institutions so they're more open, interdisciplinary and creative, where knowledge flows formally and informally, where they're much more social as well as didactic. And there are lots of models of where universities have tried to address this. Sometimes it means setting up new departments, sometimes it means doing things out in the city rather than within the university itself, setting up centres for experimentation, for collaboration in the community with the sector. These are all examples of specific creative industries, knowledge exchange activities in the UK. These are all about universities trying to build a relationship with industry and with the city at an early stage to co-create knowledge and develop skills that are fit for purpose with industry. And universities, of course, have so much knowledge that's locked up in the staff, locked up in the facilities. Those are resources that could help to mobilise sector development across the creative economy. Second and related, how do we nurture a kind of creative entrepreneurship in our cities? Of course, universities can play a role there within the university, but we also need to think about what happens when people graduate. Do they just fall out of, they sort of stumble out of the university into the blinding light of reality? Or do we actually help them in that process? Help them to find their feet, help them to build relationships with businesses that are out there, help them even to find a home. Now there are some real challenges here. Lots of people come out of art school, really great art skills, but haven't got a clue about business or management. So how do we help them so that when they come out of the university they're already much more focused on business than they would have been before? How do we help them to understand that the jobs of tomorrow aren't structured career path? The jobs of tomorrow are based on portfolios, they're based on racing around from project to project to project, often as a very small business. How do we support them in learning about the kind of skills that you need for that, but also ensure that they, when they fall out of the university, they're already connected, they're already in the networks, already in the community, so that they don't flounder, so that they realise that success looks a little bit like that on the right-hand side rather than it does on the left-hand side. That requires different kinds of skills, different kinds of competencies. And we don't just want to throw out our graduates into a world where they think that they're going to work in one sector. People often work in lots of sectors lots of the time, and people in the creative industries, if you work in design or if you work in digital media, your clients are often in multiple industries. So you need to be able to work in a collaborative, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary environment. That requires brokerage, it requires a supportive environment, it requires hand-holding, it requires enabling people to work in teams. Just in my company, I'm always working in teams. I have a core team, but I work in hundreds of other teams. I'm working in a team here in Ulyanovsk. That requires certain kinds of competency. But also, it would have helped me, I'm sure, if I'd known that was going to be coming when I left university. Because it's a difficult culture to operate in at first, but actually it's becoming the norm rather than the exception. And ultimately, as we nurture, as we support our creative talent as it comes out of the university, there are some certain things that perhaps we need to think about if we're going to make the most of our creative industry's talent. There are some specific things. Do we need to? Can we provide specialist business support to our creative businesses? In the same way that I'm sure there is probably specialist business support for the construction industry or for the retail industry. Can we provide that for our creative businesses as well? Can we provide them with access to talent, access to markets, build relationships, broker relationships? Do we need to provide them with some little bit of stimulus, some access to finance, some kind of seed funding? Can we angle our cultural commissioning process so that we invest in new content, invest in emerging talent, rather than just investing in the existing institutions that are out there? Can we invest in mini clusters or districts, workspace, activity space, places to connect, places to share? And can we ensure that the creative sector has a voice, that it's networked, that's talking to each other, talking to us? Now, there are lots of models here. These are all examples of specialist creative industries development agencies in different cities. Often very small teams that play a kind of intermediary role, providing advice, supporting networks, showcasing. Sometimes they deliver skills training activities. But what is critical is that they pull together and connect the disparate parts of the creative sector. They build a community. They help to create a cohesive, creative sense of place. I wonder, in Ulyanovsk and other cities, if there are enough moments when the creatives come together in a room to share, to learn. I wonder whether there are the physical and also the digital notice boards where you find out about things, where you learn about markets, where you learn about what's happening in the city. Also, you learn about what's happening in the wider cultural sector, and where the cool bars are, or where the interesting retail is, those kind of things. This is the Creative Times in Manchester, which is the place to go to online if you want to know what's happening in the creative industries. There are incubator models, and I think it's great that you have Bartel here. This is the Tallinn incubator in Estonia. There are lots of models there. I think the best models are those that embrace the actual distinctive landscape of the city. They work with the community to create this place that is meaningful for that creative community. This is the Round Foundry in Leeds in the UK, using an old industrial building, turning it into a mixed-use development, workspace, activity space, meeting rooms, bars, cafes. It's the hub of the creative sector in that city. And ultimately, you probably can't see this, it's too small, but when we think about supporting creative talent, we need a holistic approach. Lots of cities using this Maslow model, they focus on the basic stuff. Maybe there are some workspace projects. Maybe there are some communications activities around branding, around networking. The cities that succeed are the cities that enable their creative businesses, their creative talent, to self-actualize. So they feel that they have everything they need to flourish in that city. Every city will need to deliver different things for its creative talent to self-actualize. So the conversations is really important. Building a participatory environment where it's clear what we need to do to support the creative industry. Often, at the heart of that is the cultural centre. It used to be the cultural centres, cultural houses, galleries, museums. They were like these palaces, a little bit like this. These very difficult places to get into, with inert walls, which were showing art, often art that was created a long time ago, but they weren't connected with the contemporary, changing, ever-changing life of the city. There's the museum down the river in Togliatti. How do we open up our cultural institutions so that they become much more enabling for the wider talent base, so they become points of connection for younger talent, for different disciplines. They become brokers for conversations They call people in. So in the same way that the universities play a development role, a responsible development role for creative talent, our cultural institutions, I think, can do that as well. They need to do that in different ways. I think we're seeing the end of the audience like this, where people just come in, sit down, and consume culture. As we saw earlier on today with the presentation from the guy from Google, audiences demand more, because in the rest of their life they're interacting. There are multiple feedback loops of everything that they do, online, through social media. They're producing content as well as consuming content. We need our cultural institutions to be active in developing new types of relationships with their audiences, producing with their audiences rather than just producing for their audiences. It's a cultural shift that's required. And so when people say we need more people to come to our theatre or our gallery, we need to ask them, okay, what are you doing about that? What kind of conversations are you having with your audiences? How are you reaching out to new types of audiences? How relevant are you to today's society? We're not saying they're not, but we need to challenge them, to show how they're working with their audiences. And actually, by collaborating with creative businesses, creative thinkers, that's a hell of a way to do it. People who are at the sharp end of new technology, at the sharp end of design thinking, they can probably help the cultural sector in Ulianovsk and other cities to modernise, to become more open and relevant. And what's great about the cultural sector is that it can, in the best examples, provide those different kinds of space. What a colleague of mine called the spaces where the interactions take place, the spaces in between. So cultural houses like this, they have a lot of rooms. They could easily have night evenings where you have cultural recitals, where you have talks about new technology, where you have Petra Kucha events for creative talent, all these kinds of things. And that's about being relevant, because people still want to go to culture houses where they're relevant. Because culture houses have content which is inspiring, but we need to adapt it so that it's inspiring in different ways. One example, the V&A in London, where I live, they have a designer in residence. So the Victoria and Albert Museum, which is a fine arts museum and quite traditional museum in many ways, they have an ongoing program of having contemporary designer in residence. It's little things that connect you to the contemporary society, help you to rethink your practice, rethink your business model. Ambition in Scotland is a digital development program for the cultural sector. It's about supporting cultural institutions to develop their digital platform. That's not just about having a website, it's not just about having a Facebook site and a Twitter feed, it's about developing different types of interaction with your audience. It could be about having apps so that the whole experience of going to a gallery is more interactive. It could be around developing platforms where you have conversations with your audiences. It could be just around digital ticketing. There are a whole range of things that we need to do in the cultural sector, so that the cultural sector is moving as fast as the rest of society. Bristol's pervasive media studio in the southwest of England is a laboratory of creative practice. We're bringing technologists and artists together in some space and workspace at the back of what was quite a traditional art centre. Now it's a very funky contemporary art centre. It provides a lot of new media, a lot of digital content, a lot of global film. But they've taken responsibility to provide this space between, this new space of collaboration and experimentation that brings together different elements of the city, the technology sector, the education sector, the arts sector. They've brought them together because they've recognised that if they're going to be relevant as a cultural centre in the future, they need to be relevant to the city that they're in. I think that's a critical point to make. And they've developed all sorts of projects that converge technology, the arts, design, but all of it is about embracing the dynamic of that particular city, celebrating that particular city. So cultural centres, they need to be much more about exchange. A place of business, a place of leisure, a place of innovation, a place of creativity, a place to produce and to consume culture at the same time. The fourth thing, and related to that, is that it's very easy to have a very structured approach towards creative industries development and cultural policy. What we also need is some messy stuff. We don't just need strategy and action plans and frameworks. We need to enable the messy, informal things to flourish in our city as well. A couple of people have said to me, to be honest, that we don't give the young people enough opportunity just to try things out. There's no obvious place to go if you've got an idea about something. But if you do, you're worried that somebody might say, yeah, I wasn't going to use another Russian word, sorry. Some cities are more relaxed about that. They see their city as a playground for their talent base. They encourage people to participate in the way that the city is almost experienced. They encourage temporary works of art, things popping up in public space. They encourage people to think about specific problems in the city and co-create solutions together. And they encourage the kind of colonisation of old industrial buildings and difficult parts of the city through creative people. Whether it's in Metallica in Ljubljana, whether it's in Aarhus in Denmark, it's about encouraging people to try out ideas and to take over parts of the city, to become a new landscape of creative exchange, creative development. I think cities need to find ways of encouraging what I call these touch points, these places where people can come together to connect, to share, to talk about things, to dream, to imagine. This is Global Village Underground in East London, where they use these old train carriages and creative office workspace, so performance space, meeting space, and they have a cultural programme. It's a really vibrant cultural centre that wasn't there 10 years ago, helping almost in the way that you use acupuncture for your body. This is about acupuncture for the way you change your city. Little things in difficult intersections across your city can actually lift the overall landscape of the city. This is an old factory in Hengelo in the Netherlands. Lots of cities are trying to mobilise their creative talent through cluster initiatives. We're saying to them, okay, let's work in partnership to solve some of these issues we've got about decaying buildings, about no-go areas, about places where there's this real economic and social struggle. So in Ulyanovsk, where are those places? Where are those touch points? Where are those meeting spaces for the creative people? And if we haven't got enough of them, let's make some. Fifth, how do we build links to the wider economy? Particularly important in smaller cities, where the creative industry by itself is unlikely ever to be a major employer by itself. If you look at the evidence that we have, it tends to be the global mega cities that have huge creative sectors. That's because they have the aggregators in the global media, film, in television, in publishing. It's difficult for smaller cities to have that kind of critical mass. That's not to say there aren't exceptions where there are smaller cities with really big creative industry sectors. But it tends to be the creative industry sector can play a very important direct role, but it can play a much more expansive indirect role for the rest of the economy. For example, when we think about the innovation ecology of Ulyanovsk and Ulyanovsk region, how much of that innovation connects not just science and technology, but also connects with the arts and creative sector? That was the whole logic behind the success of firms like Apple. They would present the arts and creativity as absolutely equal in significance to technology and science. It's in the DNA of the business model. I think that's essential if you're going to have those higher value jobs in science and technology in Ulyanovsk in the future. So how do we bring those things together? How do we ensure that the creative sector isn't just talking to itself, but is talking to the scientists, the technologists? The idea in Bristol around the pervasive media studio, that kind of thing, I guess. It's also about market making and building different kinds of literacy in other sectors. So to what extent, for example, is the manufacturing sector a consumer of high quality contemporary design? To what extent does it engage with contemporary product design, contemporary service design? Or the cultural sector? To what extent does our cultural sector commission contemporary designers in their graphic design, in its software, in its interior design? Or the hospitality sector? To what extent does that buy the services of the design sector? There are simple things we can do to build markets for the creative sector, which in turn lift the productivity, lift the competitiveness of the other sectors. And if we're serious about increasing the attractiveness of Ulyanovsk, for example, as a place of tourism, then I would suggest that we build very quickly some strong relationships between the hospitality sector and the design sector, because there are some serious opportunities to improve interior design and improve service design in the hospitality sector of Julian's. But it can stretch to other things. This is, in London, this is a extractor tube for the metro, for the underground. And it was designed by somebody called Tom Fleming, who also, who saw the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in London last year? Nobody? Two people? Do you remember the flame when it sort of opened? Yeah. So that was the same design practice, Thomas Heatherwick's studio. We started off as just one person, then developed a kind of collaboration with other people, developed his own studio, developed his own methods, but critically, the first thing he did towards getting really successful was build strong relationships with engineering firms. Firms that would usually just put in a pretty boring standard extractor pipe for the London Underground. There are opportunities in Julian's to bring the sectors together, to do things that are distinctive and wonderful, but also help to build businesses in the cultural and creative sector. How can we commission high-quality contemporary design? How can we embed creativity in our physical and our digital landscape, which in turn lifts the potential of the city as a place for tourism, a place for inward investment? So I call this mainstreaming creativity. This doesn't just have to be about businesses. This can be about the people across the whole community. This can be very local, as well as being about the professional and creative class. A lot of cities are very nervous about opening up their city for normal people to participate in culture, to produce culture, beyond things like singing and being involved in dance classes and stuff like that. Why can't we engage our communities in the physical landscape of the city? So this is around the corner from my office. This is the Dalston Eastern Curve Garden. This was a bit of dirty scrubland that was just a mess. It was just a bit of old industrial land, a bit of an eyesore. Nobody went there. It's on the long term. It's going to be a development site. It will be developed one day. But there was a short-term opportunity. And I say short-term. We're already 4 years in, I think, to make this something special with the community. The process of landscaping and community-led design, participation, has created this lovely little, tiny little oasis in the city, where it's not about the municipality running this. This is run by local people. Local people have planted it, local people that work with the architects to design it, local people that lock the gates in the evenings. It's local people that run the events. So we see this in other places all over Europe. It's about embedding community creative practice in the physical landscape. This is in Cardiff in Wales. This is a development site. So does a development site need to have a boring fence around it or an interesting fence? This is an old petrol station in East London, which was taken over one summer because the local authority said yes, by an arts collective who wanted to have it as a pop-up cinema. So you see the old roof of the petrol station, and you can see inside. This was all mobilised by local people. They may have had a private sponsor from, they've probably got sponsors from drinks companies and things like this. But it was about mobilising local people to participate in creative production. And it wasn't just about investing in the cultural sector to do this. It had nothing to do with the major culture houses, the major cultural institutions. This is about networks of local communities. And I think that there's a really interesting things that can happen when the state and the communities get together to ask questions about what is possible somewhere. So if you have a problem, let's get together to creatively think about the solutions to those problems. So if you have a particularly nasty intersection with roads going above and it's horrible and no one ever goes there, can you do something fun, interesting, that mobilises people? Like this folly I've created this lovely little summer house underneath the motorway for a year, over the summer. It's about, it goes back to that point about a place being somewhere you want to work in, want to live in. These things come together. There are people, obviously, working in the creative industries who engage in this, but this is something they did as a kind of extracurricular thing. But it's about investing their talent in the place they want to stay in. And it's important, therefore, to ensure that that place isn't rigid and exclusive, but is inclusive,
показать,
and says yes to
это
people
не
when they come
какое-то
up with
скучное
interesting
место,
ideas,
холодное
however
место.
crazy
Это
they
место живое.
sometimes sound. But we do need,
И нам
underpinning all of this, and
нам
over
нужно
all of this, we
зафиксировать
need to
такие
develop
вещи.
strong,
И
evidence-based,
нам
partnership-based
нам
approach to
нужны
strategy.
доказательства
Here in the house,
использованию
it's clear
партнерства.
there are lots and lots of things happening.
И
There are lots of
в
individuals,
Ульяновске очень
lots of
много такого
institutions.
происходит. Много
We have a vision now. Now we have this vision, culture of the new generation.
организаций.
What we haven't got is a strong evidence base. We haven't done any mapping.
Но мы
What we
еще
haven't got yet are strong partnerships across the cultural sector and across the creative industry
однако у
sector.
нас есть
What we haven't got yet
некие
is strategy
партнерские отношения.
with some specific actions to
И
deliver on. So we haven't got all of the tools yet that we need to develop a strong, sustainable, creative economy. So we need to do some mapping. Every
нужно
city
составить
that's
карту.
ever been successful in developing its creative
Все
economy
города, которые добились успеха,
has done some mapping, not just to know what's happening today, but to be able to understand what success looks like. You need to be able to measure your progress. You need to be able to adjust your approach.
нужно
You can't do that if you don't know what the impact
измерять
is.
прогресс.
So it's obvious.
Это очевидно.
And this is, it's not just about measuring
И
the number of businesses or the number of
речь
organizations, it's
идет
about
не о
understanding their
разделении
environment, their
количества
needs,
предприятий,
their
которые
skill
участвуют.
sets,
Здесь
their
мы
markets, and their aspirations.
оцениваем
So mapping is not just
потребности
quantitative, it's
среду.
qualitative. Because you don't just want data, you
Это
want
качественная
intelligence.
оценка.
And key,
И
central to all of this, is about participation.
самое главное здесь участие.
Mapping isn't just about surveys, it's about
Это
talking,
не просто
it's about
опрос,
engaging with people.
а это вовлечение.
It's engagement. And do it with young people. So just go back to the point about how do you develop a sense of aspiration and opportunity in
О
the city.
молодежи,
Start
то
talking to them about their
возвращаясь к тому,
city
как
at a
мы
very young age.
усиливаем
Start building a sense
мотивацию
of their
молодежи.
voice counts. And when they get a sense of their voice counts,
Когда
then they're more likely to want to invest
понимать,
their
что
energy
их
in making
голос
a
имеет
difference in that city.
значение, то все
Again,
начинает
just as I
меняться.
said earlier on, with the cultural sector, when I said that the cultural sector needs to work with its audiences, not just deliver for its audiences. When it comes to planning in a city, you need to plan with, not just for. And the outcomes are often
Вместе с
very,
молодыми людьми, а
very
не только
different.
для них.
And we do a lot of this kind of thing, working in the cultural sector,
Мы
trying
очень
to
много делаем в
find
этом
ways
плане.
of asking the questions and building new futures in an interactive and creative
Это работа
way.
интерактивная.
To reimagine what is possible.
Мы
in a
пытаемся
city.
заново оценить возможности, что можно сделать для города.
And seventh,
И
and I alluded to this a few minutes ago, is that sometimes the success isn't immediate. Sometimes it's difficult to get a sense of where this is all going. Sometimes people feel that they're not part of the conversation and that
Иногда
they
люди
own
чувствуют,
the
что
agenda.
они остаются в
Sometimes
стороне
people
от
feel
диалога.
that their idea is more important than other people's ideas. This is always the case everywhere.
Кажется, что их
Ultimately, the partnerships are strong enough,
получают
the
должное
vision is
внимание.
strong enough, then that's okay, you can ride that out. But in some places, that's more difficult. And people who have responsibility for ultimately committing long-term investment here have to hold their nerve. They have to show results. But the partnership sector also have to see the bigger picture, see the long-term view. And the strategy is absolutely critical to that. We, a couple of years ago, developed this Tallinn Manifesto for Creative Entrepreneurship. We're currently obviously talking to colleagues in Ульяновsk about an Ульяnovsk Creative Manifesto, but I think a manifesto is just a few points in this context. What we need is detailed development strategy for the creative economy. So, this is what I was afraid.
Сейчас мы прервемся.
I'm going to give you one final but extensive example.
Заключительный, но очень важный пример.
I mentioned earlier on that last year I was the director of the Creative Economy Programme in Guimarães, European Capital of Culture.
В году я был директором программы в Гимаранче в Португалии.
And what this provided was an opportunity to experiment with a lot of the things I've been talking about through an animated and high-profile programme that I guess only something like European Capital of Culture can offer. Next year, when you have in Russia Year of Culture, and obviously Ульяновsk has this rolling title about being a capital of culture, the opportunity exists to experiment, to try things out, to demonstrate, to do that as a way of mobilising activity in the creative sector. and ultimately to reimagine
провести
what is
какую-то
possible in
деятельность
Ulianos.
в
Not feel
креативном секторе.
that you can't do things because that's never been done before, or because that wouldn't happen in Ulianos. To reimagine what is possible.
Мы должны снова оценить возможности Ульяновска.
A small city, or a smaller city in northern Portugal.
Небольшой городок на
Like a lot of
севере
smaller
Португалии,
cities, had
Португалии,
issues around the capacity of its cultural sector and its creative industry
многие
sector.
маленькие города
They had issues about confidence. Nobody knew where it was outside of the country. People don't know how to pronounce it. People don't know what it's for. And it had issues around connectivity, as a lot of smaller cities do. It takes a long time to get from it to the airport, to get into the global network society. Although it actually has very good broadband, but it had issues around connectivity, capacity, etc. European capital of culture, huge opportunity to make a noise, to say
огромные возможности
to the
заявить
world,
о себе.
but critically, a huge opportunity to address those three things about capacity, confidence, connectivity,
Это
about
огромная
showing what is possible
возможность
in a smaller city, in an area that felt a bit disconnected.
продемонстрированная в маленьком
Yes,
городке.
as in all European capitals of culture, you have your big
Всех культурных
events,
столиц
these
Европы
large crowd events with fantastic
существуют там
art,
большие
incredibly
мероприятия,
powerful imaging, the whole city comes out. You know, these
когда
are the
весь
kind of
город
crescendo
участвует в
moments
них,
in the European
когда
capital of culture, which are all
демонстрируется
very important. And they're the things, obviously, that for many
все они
people
очень
linger on
важны
in their memory after the
и
European
остаются
capital of culture.
надолго в памяти людей.
But
которые в них
the more
участвуют.
important
Но
things,
что
I think, are
гораздо
the things that
важнее,
happen
я
on the
думаю,
ground
что
with the
происходит
sector.
на
The
нижнем
kinds
уровне.
of seeds that you can
Это
plant
те
in the
семена,
cultural program,
которые
the
мы
kinds of
сеем,
partnerships you can mobilize,
и те
and the way you
партнерства,
can lift
которые мы
people out of
мобилизуем.
their
И
silos, where you can help them to think that new things are possible.
мы помогаем им понять,
So
что
for our program, we had
они
a
очень много
whole
могут
range of
сделать
different
на
things
этой
that were about experimenting with the physical, digital and cultural fabric of the city.
экспериментируют
We
с
tried to develop a
физической
program of taking over
и цифровой
old
тканью.
industrial space,
И
resurrecting it as
какие-то
pop-up
промышленные здания
cultural centers
возрождаются.
in old textiles factories,
Старые
having
текстильные
architect
фабрики
commissions, having projects
переделываются
which were all
архитекторами,
about participation for the local creative industry sector.
и таким образом местный креативный сектор участвует в этом.
Ask new questions and to energize the culture sector,
Чтобы
to
энергию
ensure that
влить
people
в
felt
это,
that they had a stake
задавать
in
много
the future
вопросов.
of the city. At the heart of that was a participatory branding process,
Является
where the city
участие в
had this
ребрендинге.
very historic, quite boring brand. We wanted the people, through collaboration with designers and artists, to come up with a new brand in the city. This is King Alfonso. He is the kind of father of the Portuguese state. He was born in and had his castle in Guimarães. He's at the heart of the old brand. The new brand plays on that whole shield that King Alfonso has, but it actually also looks like a heart. Critically, it was open to all sorts of creative interpretation by citizens of the city. We opened workshops up about how to develop new branding initiatives, about new identities. We workshop thinking about it. I love Guimarães. I participate in Guimarães. We participate in Guimarães. We created different expressions of this, different interpretations of this brand. It's a participatory branding exercise in the city. We distributed flat pieces of cardboard which can be then created and adapted into these arts. Every shop in the city, every institution in the city played on this and had its own art hanging outside the shops, in the stores, outside of cafes, outside of bars. So we weren't strict about the logo, the same way that something like the Olympic stars. We said that this logo can be interpreted on your own terms. This is about
Поэтому каждый мог
participatory
интерпретировать его
branding.
по-своему. Но это создало новый
And
бренд.
this agenda, you are part of
И
it, is a central thing.
вот смысл
This is not
этого.
top-down
Вы
cultural
часть
program, this is
этого.
participation
Это
through the whole process
участие
of capital
в
culture.
целом процессе
And the different elements
формирования
linked to the
культурной
creative economy
столицы.
are important here.
И
We have technical design
Мы,
activities. We developed new creative learning platforms.
деятельность по техническому
We
дизайну,
developed lots of
создаем
experimentations in
платформы
public
обучения.
space through an arts commissioning process called pop-ups, where we commission hundreds of pieces of art or different interventions in squares, in the alleyways, in the fountains, anywhere, where we encouraged the young people of the city, the artists of the city, to take over their city, to express themselves. We reconstructed new public squares in old industrial landscapes. These are the leather tanning pools from the old leather industry. We created a stage, a garden, a performance space, creatively reimagining what is possible here, thinking of new solutions to old industrial problems. We developed technical workshops, bringing artists together with technologists. We did this project called Open Cities, where we had workshops to develop these new camera lenses, which we put on balloons, and then we floated these balloons across the city, so that they can map the city by taking photographs from the distinctive position of the balloons. Photographs of the city that Google Maps haven't mapped that recently. We had laboratories that brought together technologists and created digital labs, developing sprints of collaboration to develop new ideas. We developed something called Contextile, which is a contemporary textile art program, because there's a city that used to mass-produce textiles. Now we wanted to reinterpret that and connect it with contemporary textile art. And we supported young talent and emerging talent in the fashion sector through a fashion hub program. We commissioned 6 of the best fashion designers in the region. We developed we worked with them to develop their collections. We supported them to develop new markets. We took them to London Fashion Week, to Copenhagen Fashion Week, to Mottissimo in Porto, to Lisbon, and we accelerated their professional development. But critically, what we did through that process is that we demonstrated that just because you're a fashion designer in Guimarães, in this small city in Portugal, doesn't mean you can't develop things of excellence. It doesn't mean you can't be connected to the global marketplace, things like London Fashion Week. And those designers, all 6 of them, are still working in Guimarães, and they're connected as kind of symbols of what is possible in that city. And capital culture can do that kind of thing, it can make it real. And we also developed a whole kind of incubation process. We provided specialist business support to networks of young creative businesses. We provided seed funding for new ideas, and we leveraged from venture capitalists an investment fund for creative talent in Portugal in the teeth of a massive economic crisis, because European capital culture gives you the reason to do things you wouldn't normally do. And I think some of the outcomes there are that the city has got improved confidence. It feels more open, more energetic, more vital, more relevant. It feels more diverse than it used to. And I think that European capital culture gave it that opportunity to correct some of the challenges that it had. It gave it the opportunity to imagine what is possible, to actually not to imagine, to try it out and deliver on it. And it's such a powerful experience. So, to conclude, Inuli asked, can we embed and mainstream creativity at a civic level? Can we connect together agendas in education, in business, in culture, in community? Can we connect our tourism sector to our creative sector? Can we join together agendas in inward investment, in talent development, talent retention? Can we connect together our science and technology in the arts sectors? Can we build a community which has creativity at its heart? And can we deliver on the things that we talk about? Can we deliver on the vision that we hear so much of in this forum? Is it possible? Let's imagine together. Now, I was trying to find a metaphor that would work for a city on a river, but I couldn't find one, so instead I went for a good one for a city near water. And the best way to get people to build a ship is not to teach them carpentry, assign them tasks, give them schedules to meet, but to inspire them to long for the infinite immensity of the sea. Now, in Ulianos, perhaps we need to twist that to the infinite immensity of the creative potential that a city such as this has, if it starts to deliver on the vision that we've heard here at this forum. So I wish you luck. I wish you every happiness, and I'm sure that together we can create a city that delivers on the vision that we hear in this forum. So, хорошо, спасибо. I don't know if we have questions or any time for questions, I have no idea.
2 minutes for questions, Tom. 3 вопроса из зала. Пожалуйста. Да? Нет, вы можете подойти.
Здравствуйте, Том. Было очень приятно слушать вашу лекцию. Я хотела бы спросить вас, инициатива построения вот этого креативного общества, она должна исходить от правительства или надо сделать так, чтобы люди сами захотели создать это креативное общество?
I think it should be both, but I think that it should start with people, because otherwise it's not real. And there are lots of examples where governments have tried to lead, but actually it's too top-down. The sector doesn't feel like it owns it. We need the government. Absolutely need them to invest. We need them to support. But it's only real if the people are doing it. And I used earlier on in the roundtable, I used the example of art and girls, which hasn't actually got anything like the government support that you have in the arts region. So the sector is just mobilising itself, doing loads of amazing things. And they're starting to unlock resources. First of all, from the university, which is getting involved, and the government, I'm sure, will follow. But here, you have the government already interested, so the opportunity is enormous because the sector can absolutely build a relationship with the government. But don't wait for the government, do it anyway.
Thank you very much. Спасибо. Кто следующий? Есть вопросы еще? Есть еще вопрос? Одна минута? Нет. Спасибо огромное, Том.